So thank you, everybody, for coming today. This is my colleague, Kyle. He'll introduce himself in a second. My name is Sam Armstrong, and we're here to kind of take a dive into what the future of IT looks like, examining some of the trends that Kyle and I have witnessed in our day-to-days, and also looking at some analysis from larger companies and firms that, their entire job is to pull up statistics and draw up statistics on the future of IT. So real quick, the speakers today, myself, Sam Armstrong. So I've been with LogMeIn for about 6 years, 5.5 years. Started in customer care doing password resets and billing inquiries. Then I moved into a customer success role where I was teaching post-sale customers how to use and best use LogMeIn products. And now I'm actually a solutions consultant, where my job is literally to consult with current customers and prospects of LogMeIn's remote access tools. So really looking forward to drawing from some of those insights that I've gained just from from customer conversations and just from working at LogMeIn for 5+ years, hopefully to share with you guys today. I am sitting down today because I had knee surgery on Wednesday. Can't keep me away from Spice World, but you can keep me sitting in a chair. So excuse me for not walking around, but it's good. I'd be wandering anyways. So. I got crutches back here. Kyle?
Okay, so thanks, Sam. I'm Kyle Dickerson. I've been at LogMeIn for 6 years. I started off in the trenches, answering tickets and phone calls and trying to resolve issues as quickly as possible. So from there, I've worn a lot of different hats over the last 6 years at LogMeIn, including management. I've done customer success. I've also done some project management as well as some consulting as well, and that's what I've been doing for the last year and a half. Over the last 6 years, we've learned a lot in terms of the conversations that we've had with customers, as well as being in the trenches, just like I'm sure some of you have been or are today. And it's something that we're looking forward to sharing some of those trends with you. And of course, I'm just a big IT fanatic and a technology nerd for my entire life. My first computer was a Commodore 64, so that might date me a little bit. But with that, I hope everybody grabbed their hoverboards and let's go.
Love it. All right, so quick agenda. Really, just real quick, we wanted to go through some of the trends that Kyle and I have seen, but also some of the trends that some of the larger research firms have actually come up with, and they've found these to be some of the biggest pieces of IT these days. Kind of the threat landscape, which is a very interesting piece that Kyle's really going to touch on, but then also getting and staying ahead of the always and constantly and annoyingly evolving environment that we all have to work in. We all know it's kind of a pain in the ass sometimes. So hopefully we can have a couple things here that will help you. All yours.
All right, so let's go over what we're going to talk about in terms of the latest IT trends. So the first thing we're going to talk about is having a dispersed and remote workforce, as well as an IT labor shortage. So this is something that everybody in the room can probably identify with. I doubt anyone thinks that they're underworked and is probably working maybe 30 hours a week and content with it, right?
30?
Maybe you've automated a lot, so that might be a possibility. So the next thing we'll cover is cyber attacks and the increase in cyber attacks on small and managed businesses, sort of what that looks like, why we're seeing that, and what we can do about it. And then the last thing we're going to talk about is moving into the mobile space. That's something that even if you guys are on your phones today, right now, I'm not going to take any offense because I know that everyone's doing work from those devices or playing maybe Candy Crush. Either way, I don't mind. So with that, let's make this real, right? So 4.3 million people today work from home at least most of the time. So that's something that is really nice to have in the sense of what it does for the employees, but it does add some strain to IT. The next thing we're going to look at is, of course, the numbers behind the increases of cyber attacks. 61% of companies have experienced a cyber attack in the last year in terms of SMB. So what's the impact of that and what can we do about it? We'll go over that. Hopefully nobody's in that room as part of that space, but it's okay if you are. I'm sorry?
Is this global?
So these statistics are going to be global in terms of most of what we're seeing here. I'll try to highlight if there is any specific differences. Oh, and then the last thing is 69% of employees are already using their mobile device to work remotely, whether that's answering emails, pings, phone calls, whatever it might be. So that's something that is also a changing space that we want to identify and sort of go over. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the changing workspace, right? So 70% of professionals have the option to at least work remotely once a day. And can I see a quick show of hands? Hopefully you guys are about that, and hopefully we're seeing that. But can you guys work from home? Do you guys have that option? Great. Good to see. I love seeing that because it's something that, it really does enable you to be able to have more flexibility in your day. 77% of people report that they don't even have to work from home. They can work from anywhere on the road as long as they have a 4G connection or maybe an internet Wi-Fi hotspot that they can connect to, right? So that's a really nice thing to have. And then as a result of that, we've got 83% of people report that they've got a much better workspace and they're more happy in terms of how they're doing their work as a result of being able to work from home. I'm seeing some nods in the crowd, and I would imagine that everyone probably enjoys avoiding that commute whenever they do work from home and loves the flexibility that provides, right?
I only have a 7-minute commute.
Mine's about an hour door to door, but that's okay. So those are some of the trends that we've seen in terms of people being able to work from home. Now, what does this mean for IT teams today, and what's the impact, right? So the first thing that we have to do is try to control the cost of IT. All of a sudden, with people going and working in the mobile space, we've got endpoints that are no longer in our forest. They're operating on networks that are not something that we are controlling. So in that aspect, it's more work for us to do that, to support those end users to have that. And it's kind of taxing in that aspect to be able to go through and make sure that we're maintaining secure endpoints in that level. The next thing is meeting demand for rapid delivery of new services. Anytime your company goes through and decides to procure a new piece of software or hardware or whatever that is, they want to have that go live as soon as possible, right? The longer that they sit on that software that they've paid for, it's lost value. It's lost potential at the same time. So being able to go through and make sure that we're meeting those needs for being able to deliver those services efficiently is super important. The next thing we'll cover is going over and looking at being able to fulfill end user requests on a timely manner. So this is something that we've identified, and I'm sure you guys probably will feel the same way, in the sense that whenever you're dealing with tickets or cases or phone calls, there's a direct correlation behind how quickly can we resolve that issue, did we resolve that issue, and what was the overall satisfaction of the end user that we supported. If we fix their issue, pretty much one-to-one correlation, they're happy with it. They're satisfied with the outcome. If we didn't fix their problem, then they're typically not as happy, even if it's not something that we could have fixed. So that's something to keep in mind. And then effectively scheduling and implementing changes to infrastructure. So has anyone here ever accidentally pushed out maybe an update during the middle of work hours and maybe had everybody be kicked off their phones or maybe had an issue? You don't have to raise your hand and admit to it. It's not that big of a deal. But this, it's an easy mistake to make. But it's something that making sure that everyone's on the same page with making sure that you're not going to go through and disrupt end users or maybe kick someone off of a presentation or anything on that whenever you're going through and scheduling updates. No need to roll up a 1809 to a 1903 update at 3 o'clock in the afternoon when your sales reps are on the phones, right? Wouldn't be a good practice. So these are some of the things that we've identified that are sort of taxing for you guys to have to go through and have to support these remote users and this evolving landscape, right? So the next thing we're going to talk about is an increase in cyber attacks. So I'm not going to ask for a show of hands here because, again, we've already gone over some of the stats. But let's go over what we can do to avoid these potentially, right, as well as the impact and the cost. So 57% of threats that have been detected were avoidable through a simple patch. So over half the time that we've had vulnerabilities or threats detected within these environments, we could have avoided it in total by just simply patching the machines. What's even worse, 34% of the time, the people that were operating and basically responsible for these environments knew that they weren't patching the machines correctly. So I don't know if I'd have a job if I knew that I was basically not doing my job in protecting the company and then something bad did happen. So it's something that's super important to recognize that if you do have vulnerabilities that you're addressing those. And then what's the cost? What's the impact? So for small and medium businesses, on average, it's about $1 million lost in terms of just data or maybe even infrastructure in terms of maybe IP if it's intellectual property. It can also have a rippling effect in downtime, and that on average is about $1.2 million per company. Now, what's the impact of that in terms of how do they mitigate or how do they deal with that? Well, over half of small businesses go out of business within 6 months of having a major attack or a major vulnerability, right? So it's something that by not following these best practices, you could literally put yourself out of business depending on what kind of situation you put yourself into. So let's take a look at the numbers and figure out what keeps you guys all up at night, right? There's 3 main trends that we've seen year over year. The first one being malware. Obviously, no one wants to deal with malware hitting their network or anything else like that. Same thing with ransomware. If you guys have ever dealt with a crypto or any sort of situation like that, it's never fun. And it's something that does take time and effort to be able to go back and roll back whatever the situation is, right? The third one being employee behavior and habits. So I joke around and I say that, from a security standpoint, I can build a forest that has a moat a mile wide and a wall, 100 feet tall. But if I've got the village idiot rolling out the door and letting people in, it doesn't help, right? There's nothing I can do about that. So it's really a lot about employee behavior as well and habits, and those are the 3 top trends that we've identified there. So what can we do about it? So it's going to start with you guys, right? You have to stay educated yourselves to know what vulnerabilities are out there, what security threats are currently evolving within this space, and it's important to stay on top of those. Because obviously, if you're not, then you're potentially exposing yourself and the rest of your company. The next thing is spreading that information, making sure that once you learn what kind of threats are out there, that you're educating your employees and keeping them up to speed with what sort of things they can do to become more proactive and protect themselves and the company.
Kyle, question for you. How many security certifications do you think you've gone through just at LogMeIn so that you can be an employee at LogMeIn?
Over the 6 years,
Ballpark.
I don't know, probably 3 or 4, maybe even 5 a year, so maybe 30. I mean, there's a lot that we go through, and that's something that ongoing education should always be an initiative for any company that wants to have this sort of security posture, right? It's super important to make sure that everybody from the CEO down to the person that's sweeping the floors knows protocol and is sort of line step in terms of what we're doing with how we handle security. We don't want anyone to go and open doors for random people that are not employees. We don't want people picking up USB devices and plugging them in to see, hey, what's on this stick? So these are
fun test. Though.
It is a fun test, though. So something that I would recommend testing out to see who in your workforce is following these rules, right? So enforcing these is also super important. The next thing is implementing additional security solutions. So it's making sure that you have the right technology in place to make sure that these things are not going to be as big of an issue. So having good AV, having strong firewalls, having rule sets that you're blocking malicious sites that you know are going to be potential issues if people do go to them. And of course, a part of that is having an IT budget. You can't implement the right solutions or the right technology for free, right? So the space that we work in today, you're not going to be able to properly or adequately protect a company with what is free software out there today. So asking for an increased budget, over 43% of companies are doing that in 2020 to basically make sure that they can procure the proper software to be secure and not vulnerable. And then the last one is automating more security processes. So doing things like patching and alerting. If you're running 0-day updates, that's okay, but if you're not doing updates at all and let's say you're waiting over a month to apply them, that's really not a best practice. I have no problem with staggering updates to make sure that maybe if Uncle Bill had a bad patch Tuesday that you're not bringing down your network or doing something negative there. But at the same time, you don't want to wait a year or two. As we went over, 57% of vulnerabilities can be patched or could have been covered or not even exposed had they properly patched those. So that's basically what we can do to help protect you guys in terms of being able to make the environment more secure.
Awesome.
And
Great.
with that,
Thank you, sir.
I'll hand it over to Sam.
Appreciate it, Kyle. That was great. So we're going to transition a little bit. Kyle and I thought that you guys are all coming back from lunch. Couldn't talk about the same thing for a full hour. So we're going to switch it up a little bit. Wanted to change the conversation to mobile. When I say mobile, I mean cell phones, tablets, whether they're BYO or whether they're company imaged and provided. Okay. Now, one thing to keep in mind when thinking about the statistics that Kyle went through and the ones that I'm about to go through is that at LogMeIn, we partner with a lot of big research firms to gain insight on trends that we see that we've been presenting. We also work with millions and millions of customers on weekly basis, monthly basis, and through customer conversations and surveys and the likes, we gain tons of insight on what the biggest pain points are, what people are doing to help resolve them, and honestly, it helps drive a lot of our product roadmap.
It does.
We rely on customer feedback to improve the product. So just something to keep in mind that a lot of this research is, yes, it's from partners of ours, but also it's a lot of things that we've uncovered on our own. Now, I probably don't need to make a case for mobile support, but it does help to kind of quantify the landscape a bit. So according to research, 69% of employees are actually using their mobile phones in the office. Whether that's work-related or otherwise, who knows. Some are also spending up to or over 5 hours a day on these devices. Now, the other piece, actually on the right-hand side here, there are some pretty interesting metrics on what they're doing on these devices. So obviously 5+ hours a day. That's a little worrisome. But if you look that 80% of them are using their smartphones to coordinate face-to-face meetings. We work with a lot of sales reps. And I know that most of my sales reps will actually give their phone number to their prospect or their customer, and then they'll just text them to set up a meeting. So giving them the option to do that is never a bad thing. And then also the third piece here is that 74% use their smartphones to remember tasks, which is definitely where I would sit in this chart. It's not really a chart. I have like 7 different places where I can keep to-do lists, and most of them are on my phone. Now, one thing that's not on the slide that's obviously a very common use case for mobile devices is multi-factor authentication. Having it and using it to lock down business, critical applications is so important. We all know this. I bet everybody in this room has more than 3 multi-factor apps on their phone. So I personally never leave my desk without my phone. I have my email on it, I have my remote access apps, I have my meeting apps, and of course, 17 multi-factor authentication apps. So the mobile revolution, it's not news to anyone. We're aware of the presence of it in many aspects of our day-to-day, but what comes with the revolution is something that needs to be addressed, and that is growing expectations. Now, these are growing expectations of the employees, not on, really the expectation that their device is going to work, it's going to always work, and they're always going to have access to the tools that they need. According to a white paper by the International Data Group, about 87% of employees feel that their organization actually needs additional mobile support technology. They need better tools and maybe even additional staff to support the growing number of these devices. The consumeration of IT is very clear here. Employees expect the same level of support that they receive in their consumer lives in their business and from their employer. So when it comes to mobile devices, people are comparing the help desk to the Genius Bar at the Apple Store or the Geek Squad at Best Buy. And we have to evolve with the times just like they have to provide the same or close to the same level of support. I'm also kind of thinking that we should all just get the blue shirts with the little yellow logos and call it good. But unfortunately, reality is that IT leaders feel unprepared to support mobile devices. We talk to people all the time about how people are supporting their either bring your own devices or the corporate provided devices, and the answer is not always what you want to hear. Sometimes it's we're not, and sometimes it's we're trying to verbally walk them through how to solve a problem on the phone.
And it can also be a challenge.
Yeah.
Let's say you've been an Android user for the last 15 years, and now all of a sudden you're being asked to support iOS, and you're like, I don't know what the hell that is. Or vice versa. You're an iOS user, and you're like, now I have to start supporting Android and learn the whole, KitKat. What the hell is that? It can be daunting to have to, take on that sort of a role and learn a new operating system, so to say, or multiple OSs, and how you're going to go through and support those. So there can be that friction there with like, oh God, what are they asking me to do now, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Now, it's also clear that in order to adequately meet the growing expectations, the support process needs to shift and grow and evolve from the traditional break-fix, right? So, in fact, as you can see here, 86% of IT departments believe that they need to improve what they're currently doing to provide support for mobile devices. And they believe they need to expand the scope of this support. Now, on the right-hand side of this slide, you can see some of the ways that IT departments are currently using or trying to tackle the increased need. 65% of IT departments are providing phone and email guided mobile support. So think a PDF with steps on how to configure email, for instance, or Wi-Fi. Okay, 39% are providing self-support or self-service FAQs. So it's a step in the right direction, but it's still not quite there. Now, next we have 37% that actually have a remote support tool in place, a piece of software that they can use to access their end users, employees, customers' mobile devices.
I was just going to say the first two require reading and the end user actually doing something. So a lot of times that may or may not hit, depending on how what kind of workforce you're working with.
I think it depends on the age.
Well, it might be that too.
And then 29% of organizations actually have what we call mobile support wizards, which are true, flows where you answer a question yes or no, and then you get a different question based on your answer to the previous question. You get to the end of the flow, and all of a sudden you have this perfect solution to exactly what you need to resolve. Okay, that's more on the self-service side, but those are really the organizations who are on the cutting edge of IT's mobile support. All right. Now, so a couple of things to keep in mind just as far as the challenges of supporting mobile devices more in the enterprise environment. So a lot of these, are relatively obvious, but there are some gotchas here that hopefully help out. So mobile devices, they churn and need to be replaced considerably faster than PCs, right? Your tablet screen breaks, your iOS device crashes. There's a lot of...
Drop it in the toilet.
Drop it in the toilet. I've done that. There's a lot of options. And you end up needing to replace them more often than you would a Windows or Mac PC. Now, there's also a wide range of manufacturers, especially with Android, of course, right? And, there's 15, 20 manufacturers of Android devices. iOS is a little easier, but I would argue, and correct me, what do you think? Do you think that there are more manufacturers of PCs or of Android devices?
Android devices.
Right? So PCs are easy too. It's your Windows environment. Android devices, it changes per manufacturer how they have their devices configured. And it really has a lot of implications. And actually, that brings me to the next one here, which is users customize their devices. I'm an Android user. It makes it harder for IT to support this unknown environment if everything is customized. Now, I customize every piece of my phone. I still refuse to convert to an iPhone, much to my fiance's dismay. But a few weeks ago, actually, one of my multi-factor applications was on the fritz. And I actually called the help desk. I was embarrassed to call the help desk, but I did it. And they logged into my phone because we have the tools in place to get actual remote control of an Android device from 200 miles away. And they took over my phone, but they looked at it and said, Sam, I have no idea where anything is on your phone because you've changed literally every piece of this. And I looked at them, not really looked because I was 200 miles away. And I was like, I'm sorry. So I ended up navigating to the right place. But being able to have either a handle on how much your employees can customize phones or, saying you can only have Samsung devices or only Apple devices, it always helps. So the next challenge is that support costs continue to escalate. That's unavoidable, right? We all know that it's going to, the cost of support is increasing. Also, mobile workers create new security concerns. Now, this is something that is good to keep in mind because even if some of these end users are off the corporate network, they could definitely still have access to sensitive data. And having a way to secure that is very important. Now, also, great end user experience, pretty self-explanatory. You want to make your employees happy. You want to get things done as quickly as you can for them. And that definitely leads to the last piece here, which at the end of the day, more downtime is lost revenue, especially if you're dealing with a sales department, even marketing, customer care. There's a lot of teams that we need to support. Now, there was actually an interesting study by the International Data Corporation, IDC, earlier this year. And it actually showed, it was reporting on the average number of mobile devices per person. I think you'll be surprised. So over the past year, it's actually gone from 5.7 devices per person to 7.0 devices per person in just a year. And kind of extrapolating on that, by 2020, that number is expected to be around 13 and a half.
Is it an increase in burner phones? Everyone's using burner phones now.
Yeah.
I'm just joking.
But I mean, that includes everything. You know, that includes your smartwatch.
Right.
That includes your smart belt buckle. Is that a thing yet? Tells you if you lost weight. But again, 13 and a half devices per person. Now, as a corporate environment and as an IT department, sorry guys, it's unlikely that you'll have to support all of those, but you'll most likely have to support a lot of them. Okay. Now, so here's a quick look on how bring your own device is gaining traction, specifically by CIOs. So this is another report separating into no tolerance and high acceptance. Very easy. And actually, this doesn't show up quite like it does on my computer. There is actually a little line between the top two and the bottom two that separate no tolerance and high acceptance. It's pretty interesting here. So, you know, and actually, well, I'll explain it a little bit, and then I'd like to hear what you guys think. So, any organization that does not allow any consumer devices. So if I came in to work with my own cell phone, I would not be able to use it on the corporate network. Or they allow some consumer devices, but they do not provide any support at all for those devices. Those are in the no tolerance category. Okay, that's better. And then in the high acceptance space, it's more consumer devices are allowed and they provide a level of support. Right? And then, of course, allowed with full IT support. So I am curious what what you guys in the audience have as a BYOD policy. So to make it easy, let's split it up into no tolerance and high acceptance. So I'll ask you to raise your hands. We'll start with no tolerance. So how many of you all would say that you either do not provide employees to bring their own devices, or you allow it but do not support them at all? Very interesting. Okay, and then the opposite, high acceptance. Okay, very nice. So
about what we would expect to see based upon the stats. All right.
Yeah, you guys got that back there, right? You counted them. So it just goes to show that everybody has a different policy. It obviously depends what industry you're in, what vertical you're in, how many employees you have. Is it feasible to allow people to bring their own devices, or the other side of this is, do you have corporate provided devices? But there's a lot of cost associated with that. Okay. Now,
Also on the no tolerance, you count, we allow it but provide no support, like in theory, but people still have those.
would you say that's better than them Googling a solution?
Now, when the superintendent says fix my mobile phone, you fix his mobile phone.
Yes. And you set up remote access or unattended access to the CEO's Android device, right?
Replacing screens, right? Doing the whole gambit.
All right. So now what we're going to get into next is actually, and this is a pretty simple slide, it's just some of the most common support requests that people get from mobile devices. Nothing earth-shattering here. But so you're probably not surprised that 48% are about configuring email. And or at least involve something to do with email. Now, luckily, a screen sharing platform with the ability to do something like diagnose issues and even push out email profiles and configurations directly to the device really make troubleshooting this quite a bit easier. But the big piece that makes this easier is being able to see what they see. At the end of the day, if you can't, have you ever tried to read an SMTP server address to somebody over the phone? Not fun. Being able to see what they're typing in, say, okay, you missed a colon here. That is a backslash, not a forward slash.
I don't have that on my screen.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. So being able to see what they see, if you can control it, great, but Apple's never going to allow that. So also 41% are hardware issues. Now, this one's a little bit more difficult, but with tools like even a camera share app or something that allows you to see through the end user's device, make this so much easier. And think about it. So if you are in a screen sharing session, so I'm connected, Kyle, let's say I'm connected to your Android phone. We'll say
Okay.
an Android phone. And then you say, and I resolve your issue with your phone, but then you say, hey, I've been having a lot of issues with my monitor.
Right.
Okay, Kyle, I don't really know how I'm going to help you. Oh, wait, I can see your phone screen. Why don't you just turn on your camera?
At which point I would turn on my camera, and I just recently purchased a new 2080 Ti, shipped to me, and the minute I plugged it in, pixelation. Nothing but pixels all over the place.
Yeah. So you wait a second, let it render, and then it'll be perfect.
No, it had to be R-made.
But being able to see not only the phone screen, but also using the phone to support physical devices, I mean, if you save one road trip, one truck roll to go get a problem resolved, you've literally paid for a license. Okay, now, finally, the third piece here is 27% for Wi-Fi support. Now, again, not rocket science here, but if you can't see what they're doing, it's almost impossible to support it. It's very difficult to help them in a way that's actually beneficial and that's actually going to get them reconnected to the network. Okay, so a couple things to think about. Now, finally, just 4 benefits that we wanted to go through. And these are benefits that come about because of improved remote support for mobile devices. Now, the first, of course, is employee satisfaction. We all know that's going to keep employees happier. They will likely have more trust in the help desk or the IT org. And also, we know that colleagues like to talk to each other and they like to complain to each other. So one person can definitely have a snowball effect that will travel down and allow other customers and colleagues to actually get the same support from you because they know it's quality. And maybe we'll get a handle on shadow IT. No promises. Now, the second benefit is really the ability to solve problems faster and to move quicker, to be more efficient. Having a live real-time view of their device screen, again, still talking about mobile, and even push things like email configurations, Wi-Fi configurations, just make it enables you to solve issues considerably faster. And by solving issues faster, you keep your employees productive, which is, of course, the ultimate end goal, besides maybe saving money. Now, the third point is a bit counterintuitive, actually, managing staff expansion. Now, with more devices, you would think it means you need more headcount, right? Now, that's not the case if you have tools that you have in place that actually allow you to be more efficient and solve these problems in a good way. It's simply using more with what you have.
I say this all the time, and it's a matter of hiring the right technology to not have to hire additional people that might be redundant or that simply don't need.
Exactly
a lot of times it's way cheaper to hire technology than it is people.
Yep. Really is. And lastly, providing mobile support enables you to help users anytime, anywhere, right?
And that's the millennials want that, right?
That is.
Anytime, anywhere. You better be available 24/7, right?
I mean, I could be in London and our help desk at LogMeIn could log onto my phone.
Right.
You know, and being able to do that and being able to have that as an option is not something that we had 10 years ago, had 5 years ago, really. So using the tools that are in the market and are available are very important. So these are just, 4 great reasons to either evaluate or reevaluate how you support mobile devices and to evaluate how they're being used by employees. So it's easier than you think to provide a good support experience if you have the right tools in place. Now, to summarize, so just wanted to go over a couple things, kind of tips, suggestions that we have for you guys, ladies and guys. So I'm going to go through the first 3, and then Kyle's going to take over and handle the last. So number 1 is just really to secure your endpoints. This can be done by whole disk encryption. Doing things like installing security measures. It sounds obvious, but you'd be very surprised how many organizations that Kyle and I talk to don't have AV in place.
Or even disk encryption. I mean, every machine from Vista on had BitLocker installed as a default thing that you can leverage to encrypt your drives. And if you're not leveraging that or some other encryption method, you should.
Yep. And one of my biggest pet peeves is when all employees have admin rights. Listen, I get it. It might be mandatory, it might be necessary, but I guarantee you there's a way around it. And we all know, every single person in this room knows the damage that one person can cause with admin rights. So, get rid of admin rights. Get your end users as secondary admins. Install software that helps. It's not as cut and dry as you may think. There are a lot of options in between a non-admin and an admin Windows user. The number 2 is plan for mobile, right? So what I just droned on for about 20 minutes on is really understanding the future of the mobile support landscape in your organization. And it's different for everybody. But the most important decision is, of course, coming down to, is it going to be bring your own device? Is it going to be a blend of bring your own device and company-provided devices like LogMeIn? So So at LogMeIn, right, we all have company-provided laptops, but we all bring our own mobile devices to work. Luckily, we make the software that allows people to support mobile devices, so that works out well for us. So again, Planner for Mobile, BYOD or company issued. Investing in remote support technologies, it's a big one. You can't have these devices unless you have a way to support them. That's like giving somebody a MacBook and then saying to them, you can have this brand new $2,000 computer, but sorry, we don't know how to support it. That wouldn't go over well. And then the third piece is to implement MFA, and that's a huge piece. It's so easy. There's so many providers now that have multi-factor authentication, using it to protect your username and your password. So if anything is compromised, you have another layer of security.
Shameless plug for LastPass.
Yes. Shameful. And don't just enforce it on your mission-critical applications, enforce it across the board. Not only does that make the authentication process seamless and the same for all applications, for all your employees, but it also is a lot easier to manage. You have one multi-factor authentication app or 17 like myself, and make sure that every application is protected. SSO helps with that as well. So that's my three. Your turn, Kyle.
All right, so with number 4, it's going to be patch your systems. I hit on this a little bit earlier. 50% of computers that have been infected could have been avoided just by simply patching them, right? So best practice would be to patch at least once a month. I'm not going to tell everybody to do 0-day patching. It might not be a best practice depending on the environment that you're in. Or if Uncle Bill maybe releases a really bad patch on Tuesday, again, that might make it for a bad Wednesday or a long Tuesday. But at the same time, you also want to make sure that whenever a 0-day attack does occur, that you've got something in place today, or maybe it was, I don't know exactly when it was released. Google Chrome had a vulnerability. You had to go through and restart Google Chrome today in order to update to the latest version, right, for that auto update to take place. Something that everybody in this space should probably be aware of, because I'm sure inside of your environment, Chrome is being used. And right now, if you're on an older version, you guys are currently vulnerable.
Kyle, they're all in the room. They can't do anything about it right now.
Fair enough. Well, I see some people on mobile devices, so maybe they could ping a colleague or something and say, let's run that patch. So that's something important to stay on top of. The next thing is going to be to eliminate, automate, and leverage, right? Wherever you see issues that are constantly arising, this is something that we do at LogMeIn every 3 months. We go back and we identify what are the major trends we're seeing, what are the 5 major cases that have come through in terms of trends. Is it a printer issue? Are we running into people falling off the domain or whatever it might be? And then we look at what we can do to automate those processes, right? So if we do that every 2 or 3 months and we can automate 1 or 2 of those processes, it gives us back hours upon hours throughout the year and years to come, right? And that's something that every good IT team should continue to do that. Again, instead of having to chase your tail and do redundant tasks, if you can find what those tasks are and automate them, you might get a bigger budget or maybe be able to purchase additional technology to make the environment more secure or whatever it is that you need to fill in gaps there. Now, the last thing we're going to talk about is planning for the worst. And of course, having a contingency plan is super important. Everyone needs to know who's going to be responsible for what in certain situations. So having a disaster plan in place for whenever you guys are running into issues, whether it be ransomware that's locking down the entire network, or just maybe the village idiot that, again, plugged in a USB device and maybe fried a laptop in terms of how we're going to handle that. So making sure that everybody's on the same page from the C-level all the way down to, again, the person who is sweeping the floors is super important to making sure that you guys have a secure environment. If there's any gaps there in terms of training, in terms of who's not being included with that particular communication or processes, then that's where you're probably going to find issues arising in the future that might end up causing you a lot more time or money or even a situation that you just don't want to be in, right? So those are the best practices that we've got in terms of being able to stay ahead of these trends with the evolving mobile space, the attacks on the small and medium businesses, and also the evolving mobile workspace that we all see, right?
Yeah, and one thing I can add is that use your resources. I mean, you guys are literally in a room of people that are all experiencing a lot of the same issues. Spiceworks is a perfect platform to get resources and to get assistance and really just to get advice, see what other people are doing. There's a lot of value in that.
There is. And it's something that it doesn't matter if you're a one-man IT shop or if you're a Fortune 50 company, we all have the same problems, right? Nobody has a perfect environment. Nobody has a perfect process. Nobody has everything figured out. So it's something that we all kind of have to work together as a community to go through these best practices and figure out, what can we do here?
Yeah, absolutely. All right. That's all we had, guys. happy to answer any questions. If not, you can have the rest of your time back. Oh, we have mics. Thank you.
Thank you.
I guess we can go to the.
Do I have to use this thing? Okay.
You sound
So-
great.
So I work in a company where we have multi-factor authentication for my remote users. And my remote users are users that we give them company cell phones and put the multi-factor authentication apps on them. I'm trying to move to where everybody from the janitor on up to the CEO now uses multi-factor authentication. But the biggest pushback I get is, it's my cell phone, it's my data, I don't want you to touch it. Because if you put something on there, you're going to be watching me, and when I go home and do things at night, after the lights go out, they don't want me to see that. And I try to tell them,
I don't want to see that either.
You're right. But, and I try to tell them, that's not what it's there for. It's a convenience tool that I don't have to put this on your desktop, and you're stranded to your desktop with the factor authentication app. What are the ways that you guys see to try to combat that? Or are there different solutions out there to work around that?
I mean, you have to have internet access to use MFA.
Right.
Period. I mean, a suggestion would be, and this is a shitty suggestion, but get them on Wi-Fi first and then do MFA. Are you required? So I actually heard someone today talk to me and said that they're actually getting a mandate to require MFA to connect to the Wi-Fi network, which I had actually never heard before. I mean, I'm sure it's possible, but I'm assuming that's not the case. This is just when they're in the office or when they're at home, they're using MFA to authenticate to your applications. That's a tough one. One thing that I would say is that, well, first of all, you're not getting any access to anything on their device by having MFA installed. It's a token.
I think that's an important part of the consumer education piece in terms of what we can or cannot do. We're not going to be able to listen to your microphone whenever the hell we want, right? It's not like it's a CIA tool that's a super secret hacking tool to go in and do that, right? It's not spyware. It's a totally different space. So it's about consumer education on that level to let them know what we can and can't do.
I'm also very curious how much data is actually transmitted when doing multi-factor authentication. It's got to be tiny. It's got to be like one line of code that's transmitted, and that's it.
It's the notion of the media today,
Yeah.
perceiving that everybody's watching everything you do, and then they think that we do that.
Right. And they just assume that every app we put on their phone is somehow monitoring them. It's the
Everyone
next
in this
Alexa.
room is creating web GUIs to hack all day long, right? That's just the world that we live in, right?
I crawl all of the web twice a day. I mean, that's a tough one.
It is. I would also
I'd
say
say educate them on what it actually is, what it does, how much data it uses.
consumer education, and then the truth of the matter is the whole company needs to be in line with this. So it comes to leadership to enforce this and say it's not up to you. If you want to work here, if you want to work in this secure environment, this is how we do things.
I don't know about you, but I like to sit around and watch what my people are doing.
They still believe private browsing is actually private browsing, right? Anything else? All right. Well, great. We are right across from AT&T, so if you guys want to stop by, happy to show you around the software.
Pick our brain. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming. It was great.
Thank you.